Hello, you are watching the Daily Roundup by People's Dispatch, where we bring you some of the top stories from around the world. Let's take a look at the headlines. Children heavily affected by Israeli blockade of Gaza. EU signs natural gas deal with Egypt and Israel. Filipino social movements continue struggle against red tagging. Ecuadorian indigenous leader Leonidas Isa Salazar released. It has been 15 years since occupying Israel imposed an inhuman blockade on the Gaza Strip. The blockade heavily restricts movement of people and goods across the borders of occupied Gaza with Israel and Egypt. It means the people of Gaza cannot visit fellow Palestinians in other occupied territories or anywhere else in the world without Israeli permission, which is hard to come by. The blockade and repeated Israeli military strikes have destroyed the economic life of over 2.1 million Palestinians living in one of the world's most densely populated regions. It has forced nearly two-thirds of its population to live below the poverty line, with basic health and other amenities severely lacking. The blockade has also caused serious mental health problems among its residents, and particularly among children, who are nearly half, at 47% of its population. According to findings released on June 15 of the latest survey by the international NGO Save the Children, 4 out of every 5 children in Gaza say they live with depression, fear, or grief. The findings record a significant jump from 55% in 2018 to 80% in 2021 in the number of children reporting severe mental health issues. A shocking finding of the report is that at least 50% children contemplated suicide and nearly 60% have thought about self-harm. The report underlines that together, 4 Israeli aggressions with large-scale bombing of the territory and COVID-19 have multiplied the effects of the air, land and sea blockade on Gaza and its people. The extraordinarily long years since the blockade, which was first imposed in 2007, has meant that nearly 800,000 Gaza residents have not seen life outside the territory. The report demands immediate lifting of the Israeli blockade and an extensive mental health support program for the affected children in Gaza. The European Union announced a tripartite natural gas export deal with Israel and Egypt on Wednesday, June 16, claiming it to be a crucial alternative to Russian gas. The 3 parties are looking to build infrastructure which will be fit for renewables, claimed the President of the EU Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, after the deal. As per the deal, Israeli gas will be brought to Egypt via pipeline and then transported to the EU via ships in liquefied form. The EU has agreed to help Israel and Egypt in future explorations to increase gas production in these countries. The deal was signed during the East Mediterranean Regional Energy Conference in Cairo. Von der Leyen claimed that a deal with Israel will help the EU address its dependence on Russia for energy. The EU imported around 40% of its gas consumption from Russia last year. A total 155 billion cubic meters of gas was imported by various countries of the grouping in 2021 from Russia through pipeline and tanker. However, the EU has imposed numerous sanctions on Russia and has tried to ban imports from the country following its attack in Ukraine in February. The deal has come under severe criticism from human rights groups who have accused the EU of hypocritical position on an occupation and violations of international human rights. Various human rights groups, including the Palestinian Boycott, Sanctions and Divestment or BDS movement, have condemned EU's deal with Israel, saying it is hypocritical to criticize one country for occupation while rewarding another for doing the same. Several groups call the EU stand on Russia and Ukraine a sign of its double standards, where it has no problem dealing with Israel that has been involved in attacks on its neighbors Syria and Lebanon and the bombardment of Gaza. Barely weeks ahead of the inauguration of Ferdinand Marcos Jr. or Bong Bong Marcos, red tagging has re-emerged as a national debate. In what is seen as a possible shift in attitudes within the ruling dispensation, Menardo Guevara, Justice Secretary in the outgoing Rodrigo Duterte administration, has called the practice of red tagging dangerous. Speaking at an online news forum, Secretary Guevara said red tagging only endangers people who are vocal about their own political views. Red tagging is a controversial practice employed by the state security apparatus and anti-insurgency agencies in the country. It involves labeling individuals or groups of being affiliated to the banned Communist Party of the Philippines or its armed branch, the New People's Army. Red tagging often lacks substantial evidence, leads to harassment and even violent attacks by government bodies and vigilantes. Several killings of activists, trade unionists, indigenous leaders, and local journalists by either the security forces or armed vigilantes have been attributed to unsubstantiated accusations of communist affiliations made by state agencies. Guevara's comments come within a week of similar statements from Clarita Carlos, the incoming National Security Advisor to President-elect Marcos Jr. Carlos, a professor in the University of the Philippines, asked the top anti-insurgency agency NTFELCAC, a legacy of the Duterte administration, to stop red tagging. Both Guevara and Carlos argued there is ample evidence that a militaristic approach towards insurgency never works. Some observers are reading these comments as a possible policy shift on the horizon as Marcos Jr. is set to take the presidency on June 30. But social movements and land defenders have been facing a slew of red tagging and consequent harassment. Earlier this month, the Center for Environmental Concerns Philippines, or CEC, and the Kalikasan People's Network for the Environment, or Kalikasan PNE, said they have been facing constant harassment and check-ins by the local police. They recently raised fears of a looming crackdown. In a report released in March, Kalikasan PNE had pointed out that red tagging had multiplied fivefold as the election campaigns began in February. According to its figures, attacks on environmental defenders increased 350%, and the number of those under attack increased by 483% in February alone this year. Indigenous leader and president of the Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities of Ecuador, or CONE, Leonidas Isa Salazar, was released in the early hours of June 15 after his arrest 24 hours ago. CONE is one of the main promoters of the indefinite national strike that began against the neoliberal economic policies of the right-wing government of President Guillermo Lasso on June 13. It celebrated Isa's release and thanked all those who mobilized demanding his freedom. Leonidas Isa Salazar is free after 24 hours of illegal detention, and due to social pressure in the framework of the national strike, the judge ordered his immediate release. The mobilization continues with 10 demands raised. Thank you all for the solidarity shown. Long live social struggle, tweeted CONE, one of Ecuador's largest indigenous organizations. Isa was arbitrarily, illegally and violently arrested by the officials of the Ecuadorian National Police and Armed Forces in the Pastocay village in the Cotopaxi province in the early hours of June 14. The authorities arrested him for the alleged crime of paralyzing public services on June 13, day one of the national strike. Thousands of protesters blocked roads across the country in the strike, rejecting the rising fuel prices, soaring cost of living, and growing insecurity in Ecuador. Following Isa's arrest, CONE Vice President Zenaida Yasakama condemned it and called on members and associated organizations to continue protesting at the national level to defend their demands and their leaders' freedom. Yasakama also called on international human rights organizations to remain vigilant in the face of violations of human rights and the right to social protest. On June 14, members of various indigenous and social organizations hit the streets in different parts of the country, including the capital Quito, demanding Isa's release. in Cotopaxi, hundreds marched to the Provincial Attorney General's office condemning Isa's arrest and demanding his immediate release. Their demonstration was met with heavy police repression. Several protesters were beaten up by police officers. And that's all for today. For more such stories, visit our website peoplesdispatch.org and follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram.